Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope everybody is fine out there. We are waiting for a few comments so that we can start. Okay. Please leave me a comment in the comment section so that I may know whether I am perfectly visible, audible. Walaikum afzalus salam, Abdul Qadir. Am I visible? Am I audible? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Please, will you leave a comment for that so that I may proceed? Thank you so much, Abdul Qadir. Nice to see you too. Just a comment telling me whether I am visible and audible both. Visible, I think I am, but audible, I need to check that. Perfect. Shere Banu Shabbir, Walaikum Afzalus Salam. How are you? Everything is fine. So, Skillet family, how are you? Hope everybody is fine out there, and we have a prediction of rainfall again. Heavy rainfall in 24 hours. So, let's hope for the best. So, today we have yet another guest with us, and today the session is going to be a little different from the sessions that we used to have previously. Let me take out the very long introduction that our guest has. So let me take it out, and then I'm going to introduce the guest, and then I'm going to let him in. So today we have Mr. Andre Hedlund from Brazil. He is an educational psychologist. He has a master's degree in educational psychology from the University of Bristol, England. He is a teacher trainer and an educationist, and he is a very famous host of. He's the host of the famous live show. I don't know how to pronounce it. Andre will come and do it. I'm doing it what I feel that is the pronunciation. Çha Pedàgogîco. He is a teacher trainer as well. And I'm letting him in. And I can see the comments. Very excited for today's session. So here we call in Andre. Hello, Andre.
Hello.
Good afternoon,
Hello, Zena.
I must say.
Yes, good afternoon here in Brazil. Good evening in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's about to be good night. It's about to be good night.
Exactly, yes. I know you've been working very hard, so you deserve to take a break, go home, and have some rest, right?
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful.
Andre, I would like you to introduce yourself because I don't know whether I was able to do justice to the introduction or not and pronounce
Sure.
it properly as well.
You did a great job pronouncing it. Congratulations. Çha
Really? Thank
Pedàgogîco.
you.
That actually means pedagogical tea. And it's just a game with words that a friend of mine and myself decided to do because we have something called philosophical coffee in Brazil, where people normally get together to talk about philosophy. So we decided to get together to talk about pedagogy and drinking tea because we both studied in the UK. But yes.
So Çha is tea.
Yes, exactly. Çha is tea. Yeah.
Okay, in
It's probably
Lisanu
very
Dawat.
similar to.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
Lisanu Dawat, the language that we speak, the native language that we speak over here, tea is called chai. So it's like
Exactly.
cha and cha. That is why maybe I was
What
able
a coincidence, right? That's probably where we got the name from, from you there.
to. So they say,
Well-
Andre, that teachers are, they have a love for tea. Maybe that is why you have named it.
Well, it was basically because of the coincidence of both of us, studying in the UK, and I love tea. I really love tea. I actually have tea almost every day now because I got used to it when I was studying in the UK.
My goodness, I also love tea. Whenever I get
Yes.
a break, I go to the kitchen and make tea for myself. I think all teachers love tea. I don't know why, but maybe there's something, universal in that.
Definitely. Yes. So can I
So,
introduce myself? Yeah.
Yes, please, yes.
Yes, wonderful. So first of all, I just wanted to say that I'm honored with your invitation. Such a great pleasure to be here. I hope everybody can see me well and hear me well. I apologize for the light. I was in a perfectly well-lit place, but I think the connection wasn't as good as it is now, so I had to move. But my name is Andre Hedlund. I'm an educational psychologist, teacher trainer, teacher. I've been an English teacher for a very long time, based in Brazil, in the Midwestern region of Brazil called Goiânia. It's it's a big city, I'd say. 1.5 million inhabitants. I've been living here for the past 8 years. I've worked with many ELT publishers. So I was responsible for basically training the staff of schools that adopted the materials. I've also worked very closely with the Brastiço Association in Brazil. So that's the Brazilian TESOL. I'm still working there as a representative of the Mind Brain Education Special Interest Group. And nowadays, my main job is to help implement bilingual programs at private schools here in Brazil. So I travel a lot. I do a lot of teacher training. I do anything they ask me to do, basically, to make sure that the programs are running smoothly. And my interests nowadays, they are very much aligned with what I'm going to talk a little bit about with you today, which is the science of mind-brain education. So I'm a neuroscience geek. I love the brain. I actually have a replica of a brain here, just to show you, and how psychology can help us understand behavior, and how the brain and the mind learn in the classroom, so that we can maybe become more effective teachers. If we know how the brain works, how the mind works, so maybe we can tutor our kids in a brain-friendly way so that they can learn more effectively and have better outcomes. That's what I think anyway. So that's me.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself properly, Andre. We are glad that you are here to share and enlighten us with the perspectives of psychology and neuroscience. Big words for all of us, and I feel that everybody was waiting for this session. So, Andre, how important, this question has been troubling me since ages. Yep. When I came into teaching, I was told that I should know about teaching methods. I should know about lesson planning. I should remember the Bloom's taxonomy. I should remember the verbs, exactly. And that's it. I should remember, those few things that every teacher should know. I was never told that educational psychology is such a significant aspect when it comes to teaching and learning. What do you have to say on that, Andre?
Well, I feel, Zainab, that most teachers, they end up replicating a lot of, I'd say, very traditional ways of teaching that, they are, I would say, even centuries old. We've been doing many of the same things for centuries, even millennia, maybe. We can trace back to Socrates in ancient Greece or something like that. And some of those methods or ways of teaching are very effective. We know that. We've been teachers for
I think Andre,
okay, I'm back. So there are things we are doing that they do not have any evidence to support, or we don't have any psychological theory to say that this is actually an effective thing and we should keep doing that. So that's why I think psychology should be definitely one of the central pillars of teacher education, of continuous professional development, because psychology studies the mind. And not only the mind, but the effects of the mind and how that will translate into our behavior. So we can observe kids and what they're doing, and we can make theories about why they are doing those things, how the mind works, and then we can find out, for example, why a kid is not really engaged in the lesson that moment. We can also find out why kids get too distracted. We can find out why kids might be aggressive sometimes, because we have observed them for a while. We have come up with theories. We have tried to basically find better ways to address those problems. So I'd say that psychology needs to be one of the central pillars of teacher education again, because this, even if it's a very basic knowledge of psychology, will definitely give us some support throughout our career, and also evidence-based practices that can help our students learn more effectively. I know that because before I understood any psychology, before I got interested in the area, I would just do what my teachers taught me to do. I would not really reflect on the things that I was doing. And nowadays I see like, oh, there is actually a theory that explains that. So let's take a look at the authors and the books and the papers and see if we can delve into the theories a little bit more and then extract what is best about the theory and then use that in our practical day by day in the classroom, right?
Exactly. Andre, when I was a teenager, the only time when I got to hear the word psychology was in psychological thrillers. I used to read a lot of novels.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
only time when I actually got the hang of this word was on the front page of a book. I mean,
Sure.
psychology, like you said, that it's not just important for teachers, but I feel it's
Yeah.
important for every other individual. In a relationship, you
Most
need to understand the other person you are related to. The same is for students, Andre. So, how important do you think that psychology should be not just be an optional subject, but something more than that, maybe a compulsory one till some level?
definitely. I think it should be a mandatory subject in not just for teachers, but in general for every individual at any level of any profession. Because I think we need to understand that there are so many great books and authors who have discussed many things about why we behave a certain way. So, just to give you an illustration, if you go back a couple of decades and we talk about B.F. Skinner, for example, or
Exactly.
Ivan Pavlov, who talk about operant conditioning, behaviorism. So we understand that a lot of our behavior is connected with the idea of reward, of reinforcement. So we understand that for you to encourage or motivate kids to do the things that they have to do in the classroom, they have to see that there's a reward. So you have to reinforce certain things for them to feel that, oh, I do want to do this. Otherwise, they feel like this is not really a benefit. So why should I do it? And they can explain very clearly that there's a thing called positive reinforcement. There's something called positive punishment. So if you want to get more of a behavior, you should reinforce that behavior with something positive. If you want to get less of a behavior, you should punish that behavior by either adding something to the environment or removing something that they like from the environment. So we understand those things. But that's one theory. That's one school of psychology. If you think about constructivism, for example, so you think that if you go back to Montessori, Waldorf, for example, the Waldorf philosophy, you understand that kids, they want to explore the environment and build knowledge on their own, and you just have to guide them. You have to follow them. You have to make sure that they're okay. You have to make sure that their basic needs are met. So for, I think, many kids who are probably experiencing, I don't know, maybe they are not feeling part of the group. They don't have a sense of belonging. They might be aggressive towards their peers and things like that. They would most definitely benefit from studying psychology, and so would their parents. And I think their parents even more, because sometimes parents are doing everything wrong. I don't want to, to offend any parents here, but we have to have some basic knowledge of psychology, especially towards emotional intelligence. We understand that kids, they can get frustrated. They can be angry sometimes. When we try to distract them from that feeling, they will associate that feeling with something very negative, and they will never want to experience that. And that will make them even more frustrated in the future because they don't know how to deal with negative emotions. So, I wish parents knew that. And, you're crying, you're sad, that's okay. Sometimes we get sad, sometimes we cry, and then maybe tomorrow you'll be happier. Maybe in a couple of hours you will be happier. But we need to know that that's part of how the mind works. Otherwise, maybe we'll actually do more harm than good, right?
Exactly. Andre, sometimes as a teacher also I feel that, there's a lot of effort required to keep myself motivated. So in as teachers, we believe, and it's said also that intrinsic motivation, or if you're intrinsically motivated, that's far more sustainable than any other extrinsic motivation like increments or perks in job.
Yeah.
But that is so difficult to do. Can you suggest some tips, to
Wonderful.
intrinsically motivate yourself and not to look towards those perks only for motivation?
Yes. I think that's a great question, Zainab. And I feel like a lot of teachers confuse engagement with motivation. And if you think about the origin of the words and how we use those words in different contexts, engagement is much more task dependent. It's right now, I have to finish this task or this lesson. So I'm engaged. I'm actively doing the things that I'm supposed to do, right? And we can think of engagement as something that has ups and downs, just like motivation. But we can think of students who are authentically engaged. They're just complying strategically. And then there's ritual engagement. They're pretending to be engaged because they don't want to incur any of the punishments or anything that the teacher might do, right? So we can think about engagement as that. And motivation is much more goal-oriented. So it's much more long-term if you think about it. And so there is a theory called the self-determination theory, which was created. It was written by DC and Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, Edward DC and Richard Ryan. And they say that, yes, we can look at motivation from two different perspectives. External factors that will make us do things that we have to do. It could be money, could be my job, my boss, my mom, my dad. I have to go to school. And it could be looked at from within, like an internal perspective. That's what we call the intrinsic motivation. And that's the more genuine kind of motivation. And they say that for you to promote that kind of motivation, you have to give the students a sense of autonomy. They have to feel that they have choice. That is not just doing what is imposed on me by my teachers, by my parents, but that I can actually select that. And it doesn't have to be a lot of choice. Instead of saying, hey, students, do this, you say, hey, students, I have two options, only two options. Which one do you prefer? So you're giving them some power to choose what they want to do, right? So a sense of autonomy, a sense of belonging that they refer to as relatedness, and a sense of competence that they can actually get better at the things that they do. So I call it the ARC principle. A for autonomy, R for relatedness, and C for competence. If we have those elements, we're probably going to be more intrinsically motivated. And just to wrap up this part, I can actually mention a bunch of other authors. Daniel Pink has a wonderful book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And he says that humans are motivated by autonomy again. So autonomy is always there. Autonomy, mastery, the sense that they're getting better at things. And he also says purpose, like that I can actually make a contribution. I can leave a mark on this planet, before I go. So I'm actually much more motivated because I know that my job is relevant, not just to, my immediate environment or context, but to the whole community, to the entire world, right?
Okay, thank you so much for answering it in a way that is so clear to me now. Okay, Andre, we have a question from the audience. First of all, do you counsel as well? Because you are a psychologist, right? A degree wala psychologist. In Pakistan, we have many people who claim that they know psychology, not just in Pakistan, but globally. But again, when you are certified, you have a degree, then, like people can trust you with that. And of course, the same goes with counseling and guidance also. So many people say that we are career counselors, but they just claim that on a certification. But if somebody knows psychology and has a master's degree in it, so I think that person should be asked, do you counsel? And if you do so, how do you set up your counseling goals?
Well, actually, I don't counsel, and that's a great question because we are not supposed to do so. We can advise and we can refer children. We normally work with children and teenagers. We can refer them to a clinical psychologist who has the background and And they study much more psychology, not just psychology of education, because we don't really go deep into, psychoanalysis, for example, and Freud and Carl Jung and things like that, even though I have studied all of those things out of curiosity. But what we can do with the degree that I have in the UK, I could actually be part of the board of a school, and I could, of course, give recommendations as to why kids should learn this way, or what kind of protocols or what kind of, let's say, reinforcement we can give those kids who are struggling and things like that. But I cannot say I could probably, what I could do with the degree I have is say, I believe this kid has some sort of condition, such as ADHD, right? Attention deficit and hyperactive disorder, or maybe they are on the autism spectrum or something like that. Maybe they are dyslexic, because I can see the evidence. I know what it should look like, so I can do that, but I can never diagnose a kid. So you would actually need an actual clinical psychologist, and most certainly a doctor, to diagnose a kid and then to start the proper treatment. But I would, as an educational psychologist, be able to tell you, well, if this kid has dyslexia, I know what we can do in the classroom to help them learn in a more effective way. We understand that dyslexia is a problem related to understanding symbols, like, reading, writing, and so maybe you can increase the font size of the text, or you can increase the space between the lines, or you can give them cards with different colors or things like that. We can do that. We know what strategies and techniques we can use in the classroom, but we can't really, do any therapy with the kids or anything like that. Then they have to go to an actual clinical psychologist, right? But I believe the goals, just to answer very quickly, I think the goals, we have protocols and documents for, sort of like a script that we can follow to set up the goals. I think we use Maslow. For those of you who are not familiar with Maslow, there's a pyramid of needs. And I'd encourage you to take a look at Maslow's theory. So if the kid is hungry, if the kid is not, doesn't have a sense of belonging, if the kid is intimidated, if the kid is, maybe the kid doesn't have both parents at home at the same time. So there are many things that we should look at so that we can counsel those kids, right?
Exactly. Okay, Andre. So I think the audience, the person who was asking this question, has understood what you were trying to say. Okay, Andre, I would like you to talk about the topic. The topic is mind, brain, and education science. So what is that basically?
Well, I do have something that I want to show the audience here that I actually bought a couple of weeks ago. So this is my brain, a replica of the brain. And so what is MBE? MBE is a transdisciplinary subject or area that puts together psychology, neuroscience, and education as a whole. So it could be pedagogy. Pedagogy is basically how we teach kids. And then we have andragogy. That's how we teach adults nowadays. And why is it transdisciplinary? Because no field is superior in any way, when compared to the others. And that's very important for me to say, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that if I have neuroscientific knowledge, I can tell you exactly how you should teach, what you have to do, because I understand how the brain works. That couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest, because if I'm a neuroscientist and I studied a brain inside a laboratory, an fMRI machine, like a magnet resonance imaging machine, and then I say that the brain does that, so teachers have to do that in the classroom, they're completely different environments. Teachers have power. We should be empowered as teachers because we've spent hours and years and decades with our students in the classroom. And that's why I like MBE, because neuroscience will only confirm certain things that we already do in the classroom, certain practices that we have or strategies. The same with psychology. So basically what MBE does is, okay, teachers normally assign homework after their lesson. So there's homework assignment. So is that effective? Does that work? So let's take a look at psychological theories. And then we have this theory of reinforcement, a very behavioristic theory. Okay, wonderful. So yes, we have something in psychology that explains. What does neuroscience say? In neuroscience, we understand that in the center, right, the center of the brain, we have the limbic system. We have a structure called hippocampus that is responsible for long-term memory consolidation. And the more we revise, the more we revisit things, the more we can remember and retrieve those things. So yes, homework makes sense. Wonderful. So we should keep doing that, right? But then hello? I
Yes,
think
we
we're
can hear
back,
you.
right?
Yeah, we are back. But you are frozen somehow. The
Can
screen
you hear
has-
me, Zenab?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, back now.
Hello?
Perfect.
Okay, yes. So I was just saying that neuroscience also
Yeah.
tells us, for example, that for us to consolidate memory, we have to sleep first. That's when memory consolidation occurs in the brain. So maybe assigning homework to be done on the same day after the input is not such a great idea, because first we have to sleep to consolidate whatever we saw in the classroom, the content that we saw in the classroom. So maybe, and then I can start studying, okay, so what if we assign homework to be done the next day, not on the same day? Would we get better results? And neuroscience tells us, yes, that we get better results. So that's what MBE does, right? It checks the things we are doing from a neuroscientific, from a psychological, and from a pedagogical perspective, so that we can confirm things and do what actually works best. And I take the opportunity to share this wonderful book with everyone who's watching. So Making Classrooms Better, 50 Practical Applications of Mind, Brain, and Education Science by Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa. She's one of the biggest MBE authors. I read a lot of her book for my dissertation, so I know a lot of the theories there. And I really recommend, if you have the chance to buy this book, or you can go to my blog. I write about the things that she discusses. Just go to my blog. I'll send you the link later. Follow me on social media that I talk about those things.
Okay. Andre, you made it so clear. So basically, mind, brain, and education science is a very new word or a very new phrase or whatever you call it, grammatically for all of us over here. We have a question from the audience, and I would also like to ask that. We know this somehow, but still we have this question somewhere lingering in the air. Do emotions contribute to intelligence?
Wonderful question. And so I take this opportunity to bust or debunk a myth, because I think a lot of people everywhere in the world believe that we can make rational decisions. I don't know if you say that in Pakistan as well, but most countries I go to, they say you have to make a rational decision. And what does that mean? It means that you can somehow suppress your emotions or something like that. You can leave this emotional state that you are in so that you can make a rational decision. According to neuroscience, that's impossible. You can never suppress your emotions truly. So we know that this area of the brain in the center here, called the limbic system. So we have a bunch of structures, the amygdala, hippocampus, like I mentioned. You have the ventral tegmental area, very complicated names. They are responsible for the physical or physiological manifestation of our emotions, right? And we know from a Portuguese neuroscientist that if you have some sort of damage to this area, to some of those structures, and you cannot experience emotions like we do normally, that means you cannot make decisions, which is a paradox if you think about it. Because, if I cannot feel my emotions, I should be able to make perfect, cold-hearted decisions. That's the opposite. You cannot make decisions. Antonio Damasio is the name of the neuroscientist, and he says, emotions, they give us the lift that we need to make that decision. So I believe that we have to work with the notion of emotionally intelligent people or kids. And because, for example, if you are in a very negative state of mind, state of emotional state, we understand that you cannot really access the prefrontal cortex. That's the frontal area of your brain that is responsible for very sophisticated thinking, the higher order thinking skills you were talking about, Bloom, right? So you think about analyzing, creating, evaluating. So that's done here in the prefrontal cortex. If for some reason you are aroused emotionally, intimidated, scared, or in pain or something like that, you cannot really access that area of your brain, which means you cannot really analyze, you cannot really create, or you can do it in a much worse way, let's say. So the idea that emotions contribute to intelligence is very true. We have to be able to deal with our emotions. We have to be able to experience the emotion, and we have to be able to separate the reaction from the action. So that's the idea. It's not that we can stop the emotion. You're still there, but you can control how you respond to that, depending on the situation. Sometimes we have no control if it's something very, tragic, strong, or very emotional. You cannot really control that, but you can train your brain. You can practice, and then you can get better. And that gives you all the resources you need to do the higher order thinking skills, right?
So, Andre, is there a difference between we keep confusing these two words, brain and mind? So, is there a difference between these two words? And if there is,
Yes.
what is that?
That's a wonderful question too. So this is your brain, this is your brain. This is actually half of your brain. This is the right hemisphere of your brain, and your brain is an organ with tissues and vessels and a lot of fat. Most of your brain is fat and water, basically. That's the myelin sheath that protects the neurons, the cells. It's basically fat. That's why there's electricity. It's to insulate the wiring of your brain. And it's an organ. It's something physical, something that we can actually hold in our hands. It weighs around 1.4, 1.5 kilos. It takes up to 25% of all your energy intake. So it's a very special organ. But the mind is much more abstract than that. I'd say that the mind is an abstract projection of your brain. So your mind is responsible for your consciousness. We cannot really measure the mind. The mind is something that you cannot really hold the mind in your hands. It's you can have maybe you can have brain damage. You can have an accident, and for some reason your brain doesn't work very well, or you are in a coma, but your mind can work perfectly fine. You can still, maybe you cannot move, you cannot talk to anyone, but you can see people, you can hear, so your mind can work perfectly fine. That's why it's very difficult to study the mind. That's why psychology is in the humanities. If you think about it, it's not even medicine or biological, it's more humanities, because there's a lot of philosophy involved, coming up with theories and everything like that. And the brain is much more medical, much more physiological, and much more finite. I think the word is that your brain is finite and your mind is infinite. It's endless. Yes.
Very right. Very rightly said. How do you define intelligence, Andre? What is your definition of intelligence? If somebody asks you to define who is an intelligent person, according to you, who is that?
Well, this is a very tough question, I must say, but let me do my best. I think there are different ways of viewing intelligence. Nowadays, neuroscientists agree much more on this idea that we have a general intelligence, that we actually have a letter that represents that. It's G, and it comes from the early studies of IQ. So if you think about those guys who came up with the IQ test, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, I think, Binet and Simon. So they were the ones who tried to quantify or measure this G factor that represents intelligence. And that's basically our ability to solve puzzles in a way, to think logically, to use those higher order thinking skills that Bloom talks about. That's intelligence. But then in the 1980s, Howard Gardner came with a different classification or different categories of intelligences that he called the multiple intelligences theory. And then he added, I think at the beginning there were 7 intelligences, and then he added more. So there are 9 intelligences, like bodily, kinesthetic intelligence, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and their environmental intelligence, and all those things, right? So neuroscientists nowadays, they think that those things are not intelligences, they're skills, and it's different. It's different because they don't necessarily correlate high with your ability to solve puzzles, right? So if you are an artistic person and you can play many instruments, for example, does that give you the edge, or does that give you an advantage over people who don't have that, who don't play any instrument when you're solving puzzles? So that's the idea. So I do tend to agree with this neuroscientific discovery that we have one intelligence, but we can have multiple talents, multiple skills, I think, or competencies, right? But I don't think that intelligence determines how successful you are. And then we go back to psychology and neuroscience. Carol Dweck has written a bunch of papers and a book about the growth mindset concept, that if you have a low IQ, it doesn't mean that your IQ is going to stay low forever, or that you cannot be successful, unless, of course, you don't apply yourself or you don't make the effort, let's say. So there are concepts like growth mindset, grit, long-term commitment, and things like that. They are probably going to help you become more successful than just intelligence itself, right? And if I may take 1 second to answer Fatima, she says, if I'm emotional, does that mean I'm weak? Emotional, basically here, is crying whenever. I don't think so, Fatima. I think that means you're strong. It's the opposite. I think, the power of your emotions allied with your G factor, your intelligence, will help you become, a very special human being, who embraces your full humanity and does what you're supposed to do. So remember that, and you're going to be a strong person.
She is really a strong person already. Okay, Andre,
Wonderful.
This question also, she's a teenager, and she is asking, how do you control your emotions in critical times, and what you will suggest us about it? How do you do that?
Yeah, this is a very difficult thing to do, and it's related to the concept of self-regulation. From a neuroscientific perspective, we know that we have certain functions that are performed by the frontal areas of our brains. They're called executive functions. And to give you one example, the working memory is a type of executive function. It's how much information or how much anything, it doesn't have to be just information you can hold in your memory at a time. When your working memory is full, you cannot really manage your emotions very well because you don't have space for you to put your emotions there, right? So you cannot
like your
really
mobile phone, right? It's like your mobile phone. The memory is full. You need to
yes.
stuff.
That's a perfect analogy. Exactly. So if you have too many files in your mobile phone and you need to add something else, it crashes, or you have to delete old files or something like that. And we understand from a psychological and neuroscientific perspective that there are ways we can practice, we can train our self-regulation. And I think that comes very much from your parents when you are a very young, girl or boy. They have to co-regulate you by setting limits and telling you that you cannot do everything you want. There are many things we can do, like basically managing behavior. But when you are more responsible for your, emotional regulation, self-regulation, one thing that you can do is take a break. I think the limbic system, responsible for your emotional response to the world, is going to fire up a lot of neurotransmitters and things like that, and you cannot think clearly because it blocks the communication between the prefrontal cortex and the center of the brain, right? And the one thing you can do is breathe, take a deep breath, take a break, step away from whatever is happening, and try to think clearly. Try to ask yourself many questions like, why am I feeling like that? Why am I responding this way to this situation? How can I, control myself? Do I have to react like this? I'm feeling this emotion, this emotional response, but do I need to respond in that way? Because we can control those things. And I think co-regulation works very well. If you're feeling very stressed, like you're about to jump someone or to do something very bad, ask somebody. So somebody can help you co-regulate. Somebody can put some sense into your head, like, don't do that, you're hot-headed now, just take a step back and rethink, and then try to calm yourself down.
Okay, so a few days back, we had a philanthropist and an educationist on the show, and she is working in an underprivileged area here in Karachi, and she talked about this strategy in her way. She said that when you are very hot-headed, or when you are about to do something which you would regret later, just tap your nose and pause for a while, and just step out of your body and think that what I'm going to do, is it going to benefit me? Is it going to benefit the people around me or the society or whatsoever? And then step back into your frame, and then you will be absolutely fine. So just sharing it, and in addition to what you shared, that's really beautiful. The way you fragmented
right?
It's connected, everything connected. And here, people in Pakistan, like Fatma has said, already said what I was about to say. So maybe that's true friendship, Fatma. People in Pakistan are usually extra sensitive and emotional. I was about to say that people in Pakistan are really impulsive, So give us some advice to keep ourselves calm. Please.
I feel like Brazilians are the same, and I think people normally. I mean, I think people around the world refer to Latinos, people from Latin America, very passionate people and things like that. And there might be a historical reason for that. Maybe because of our culture, we were not really taught to keep, our emotional responses to ourselves, and then separate that from. We're very generous and kind in a way. I think the things we mentioned here, like, just take a break from what's happening. Just pause and then try to reassess what's going on. There are some techniques, like really take a deep breath, meditate a couple of hours a week, maybe 10 minutes a day or something like that, because then it's all about breathing. So this is when you increase the flow of oxygen to your brain, you have this wonderful feeling that, wow, it's almost like you are intoxicated with something, because it's such a great feeling that then everything sort of fades away. So you can do that. You can close your eyes, you can count to 10, you can take a deep breath, you can just stop and ask someone their opinion, because they can help you co-regulate as well, and step back and just reassess. Because really, if you don't do those things, cortisol builds up in your brain. That's a neurotransmitter that will cloud your judgment, and you may do something very stupid. You could attack someone, you can start crying, you can break things. And so really, you just have to take 1 or 2 seconds to break that cycle. Stop a little, and then try to control yourself. Breathe. Take a moment to look away, to step back, and then hopefully you'll be able to control yourself. Okay, and yes, Fatima, I will visit Pakistan.
Yes, I'm officially invited now.
Wonderful. I'd love to.
Okay, Andre, so as teachers also, this feeling of panic, this feeling of anxiety, and this feeling of frustration is so common, I feel, to all the teachers around the world. Globally, you would see that most of the teachers are overloaded with work sometimes. And sometimes, most of the times, you would see them bursting out, shouting, yelling at kids, yelling in wrong places, shouting at the wrong people, punishing wrong kids. So, this is something that is happening everywhere. So, what do you suggest, Andre, that teachers everywhere in the world should know about this organ brain and this abstract version of it as mind? So, what do
Yeah.
I, as a common person who does not know anything about psychology but knows everything about teaching, should know about brain and mind?
Well, I can tell you the general principles of the mind-brain education science, because I think they say a lot. They are very broad. Sometimes I'd say even a little too abstract, but I think they give you a very good idea of the things you should know. The very first principle is that human brains are as unique as faces. And I think that breaks a lot of paradigms already, because we tend to look at our kids, at our students, as if they were a mass of the same thing, we don't look at them as individuals. And that's what's going to cause a lot of frustration sometimes, because we end up comparing student A with student B. He did it well. Why don't you do it well? And we don't realize that every student has had a different path. If you look at where they are right there, that moment in your classroom, how they got there, the influences they had from the environment, their biology, their genetics, it's very different. So you have so many variables that you cannot control. But when you acknowledge that they are different, and then sometimes they need a little more time to do the same thing, and you respect that, and you encourage them to do so, then I think you can save yourself from a lot of frustration in the classroom. And that's just one of the principles. We also know that all brains are not equal, because context and ability shape learning, right? And what does that tell us? It tells us that the context that we want our students to be in has to be very rich, and it has to give them a sense of empowerment. And I feel like a lot of us are very frustrated in the way we teach, because we're still very much teacher-centered in a way. Our pedagogies are very much about us. We are the beam of knowledge in the classroom, and everything comes from us to the students. And students were born into a different era of technology and access to things, and we're still teaching in pretty much the same old ways. And I like very much to look at pictures of old classrooms at the beginning of last century and the classrooms we have today, and nothing has changed. You have a teacher standing up in front and all the kids sitting.
Yeah.
Many times they're not even sitting together. You have the individual rows, and then why has everything else changed? If you think about a car or an airplane or all other things, they have evolved in the last 100 years, 150 years. But the way we teach is very much the same. So we need to give our students a sense of empowerment. You also have to remember that our brain is highly plastic. So, which means that we can always learn. Our brain is always making changes and new connections. And this is very important for us to know, because we normally label our students as this or that. They will never be able to learn. And many times it's because we're not using the most effective strategies, and because they believe they will never learn. So you can teach them that if they take certain steps, if they learn how to become more self-efficacious, if they learn how to develop a more growth mindset, if they understand that the brain is plastic, so if they understand the idea of neuroplasticity, if they understand that there are techniques based on the MBE science that will help them learn more effectively, they will probably learn. If they have a learning condition, a learning disability or difficulty, like dyslexia, there are also strategies that we can use for them to learn. So I think those general principles, they can really tell us a lot about learning. And I'd like to wrap up with the last principle. There's a list of 6 principles. The short version, there's another one with 21 or 22. But the last one of this first list is attention and memory are required for learning. So there's no learning if you don't have attention and memory. So we know that there are attentional networks in the brain, in the frontal area of your brain, that they need to be activated for the students to get whatever stimulus is being thrown at them, like environmental stimuli, right? Images, sounds, and things like that. If those things are not activated, the information will never start consolidating as long-term memory. We understand so many times the classroom, the kids are messing around, nobody is paying attention, but we insist on teaching before we have to grab our students' attention. Otherwise, they will not learn. They won't be able to retrieve that information because they won't even start consolidating memory, right?
Exactly. Okay, Andre, I have a question and I wanted to ask you this question, and I saved it for the session. People say, that emotional quotient is of much more value, and of course that is if we compare it to the intelligence quotient. But on the other hand, we also hear that teenagers, mostly they have a very fixed mindset in a way that there are only two ideals for them. Either something is right or either something is wrong. So how do we, with this kind of mindset, how do you think we can promote emotional understanding or emotional intelligence in a classroom where children are judging actions only with two parameters, right or wrong?
Well, that's a very, very nice question. And I think probably the key to success at any level, anywhere, I think we have to start embracing our humanity, because that's something that we've lost because of a lot of, to be very honest, a lot of some Western values that have been propagated around the world, like this cold-heartedness or something. We have to be machines and we have to produce and we can never be emotional and things like that. So we have to go back to that time that we embraced what is human about us, and feeling emotions is part of that. So teenagers, kids, and adults all alike, they get emotional sometimes, and they have to acknowledge that, and they have to understand that it's okay. I mean, if you're not feeling those things, you are not human. It's about feeling different types of emotions. That's what really makes us human. And also, it's focusing on the journey, on the process, and not the final product, I think. So Carol Dweck says that there are a couple of elements we can use to promote growth mindset. And I feel like students are always competing against each other to get the best grades. And they have to compete against themselves, They have to look back and see, am I improving? Is this my learning curve? Am I getting better? So if I compare myself today to myself last month, did I get better grades? I don't care what my peers got, I got a 4 last term. Did I get a 5 now? It's still a low grade, but I got better. So I'm focusing on the process, on the journey. And I think teachers can also help promote a growth mindset by praising students for a job well done, but not just, but also for effort and dedication and grit, This is very important because we normally just praise students for anything. Maybe they did something that is not even good, and we say, wow, you are so intelligent. You must be a genius. Look at what you did. And maybe it wasn't that good at all. That's not the kind of feedback we should give our students. We should say, this is great, but don't you think you can do it better? Like, maybe I can help you do it better. There was an experiment with a kid who had to draw a butterfly. So I don't remember the name of the kid. I will try, but it was an experiment with 6-7-year-old kid, and they're not exactly wonderful artists. They can't really draw that well.
Yeah.
So he drew a butterfly, and he came to the teacher, and the teacher looked and said, "This is great, but I think you can do better. Look at some of the things you can change and try again." And then he brought again the next draft, right? It was better, but one of the wings was very weird. And then he said, look at the wing. Maybe you can do it better. So he did that 7 times. The kid brought back the same butterfly drawing. So again and again and again. But when you look at the final draft, it looks like a piece of art. It's so beautiful that it could have been an artist. It could have been a famous artist. And he painted, and it looks like a real butterfly. It doesn't look like a crab or anything else like the other ones, because you gave the chance in a very welcoming environment where mistakes are part of the process. You gave your student the chance to redo his work, and you didn't judge him. You said, this is the time for you to learn, but you also didn't compliment him just for doing whatever, you guided him. And I think that's our job, right?
Yeah, this is something so important to be understood. The example that you gave right now, as a person, I took away two things from that. First of all, that whatever compliments or comments you are giving to your students, whatever age they are, whether they be in kindergarten or whether they are seniors or whatever, they need to be honest. So, in the educational field, they tell you to be all positive about everything. So, like you said that, it's beautiful and what an intelligent person you are. It should not be that, but it should be the other way, that it's a great piece of art, but you can improve upon it. Don't you think there's something wrong? Now, that would allow the child to go back, reevaluate and see what he has drawn, and then build upon it and then come back. Now, there are two things. He went back, he accepted, number one, the compliment, and number two, criticism. So it
Exactly.
brings in that, patience to accept criticism and again do whatever you did. So that requires a lot of patience. And okay, Andre, here in Pakistan, we have many schools who are practicing this, and we are also one of those schools. We try joining or associating a value with content. For example, if I'm teaching acceleration in physics, so I would try to connect it with progress or success or something like that. So
that's
this,
nice.
This is just one tip, or this is just one way of incorporating emotional intelligence. So are we doing it the right way? It's called social emotional learning. So is it a part of the MBE umbrella or not?
Most definitely. So to give you an example, quite recently, about 2 years ago, the federal government in Brazil, in association with different teacher unions and associations, they came up with a document that we call the Basic Guideline for Competency-Based Teaching, basically, that is going to replace the old only content-driven curricula that we have. And one of the general competencies that we have is emotional intelligence or emotional learning. And I feel like what you're doing is a wonderful example, because you are attaching value or an emotional value to other things that are, basically content of different disciplines or different subjects, right? And this is another opportunity for students to think about what emotional intelligence is and to have a chance to practice themselves. Because I feel like the old views of teaching that we still have, they're very present in my country, is that I don't care about students' emotions. They have to learn the content. I have to cover the content, right? So if you're teaching acceleration in physics or whatever, that's all that matters for that lesson. But then, what if the students are not feeling okay? What if the students are not at their best, the best state of mind? Once you attach that to progress, to moving forward, then they can reflect upon those things, and then that helps them become more emotionally intelligent, I think. So yeah, that's a great idea. I think you should keep doing that. And I think I'm going to use your idea, if I may, with my teachers here in Brazil.
Why not? I remember I was teaching King Bruce and the Spider in grade 9. And we were talking, I was thinking of how to connect it with, a real life situation or a value. Of course, literature can easily be connected with the value. But again, King Bruce and the Spider is a very simple poem. But again, the message is not very simple. So I tried to connect it with that lemon and spoon race. So, the students were actually, so it was connected with a scientific concept. The science teacher was also there. I can't remember the concept because she was responsible for teaching that concept. We talked about perseverance, and then we talked about Thomas Edison, that, whenever he used to get this idea of an invention, he would lock himself up in a room, and the family was instructed not to knock on his room or, to ask him when he's coming out or something like that, until the time his idea was actually, the idea would materialize into an object or an invention. Then he would come out. May it take 7 months, may it takes 8 months. And that's what perseverance and grit is, to keep doing and not leaving without getting your results?
That's exactly it. And I just Googled very quickly because you mentioned Thomas Edison, and I remembered a story that he actually tried more than 3,000 different prototypes before he came up with the light bulb. And that's a great
That is a big thing of
example of
patience,
grit, growth mindset, right?
Yeah, exactly. Having that much of patience of trying out so many prototypes so that you can, being a perfectionist, giving up time to something that you are trying to create for other people, basically, not for you, actually. So that was never in
Yes.
his mind that it would become so popular after his death.
Yep.
So, Andre,
Perfect.
1 hour is up, and I feel that I'm enlightened to the core. I thoroughly enjoyed the session. And again, there's a question that we missed out. Actually, it has gone up somewhere.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you what pulled you into psychology. Why did you become a psychologist, educational psychologist?
Well, yeah, that's a funny story, I think, because I was into international relations and political science. And then I had this wonderful summer that I took a break, and then I traveled and I started, interviewing teachers, and I realized that education was my calling, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And at the same time, probably a couple of months before that, I came across the brain. I saw a couple of things about the brain and how the brain works and how it can actually help us understand human behavior and learning in general. How we learn and how we can learn better. And then what pulled me was the opportunity that I got from the British government. I actually got a scholarship. So I encourage everyone watching us to check out for the Chevening scholarships. Okay, so it's CheveNing, Chevening scholarships, and I studied under one of the biggest references of neuroeducation, educational neuroscience in the world, Paul Howard Jones. So when I was looking for the courses that I wanted to do in the UK, and I saw that this guy was teaching at the University of Bristol, and he was teaching psychology of education and also neuroscience of education, I said, that's where I have to go. I want to understand more how the brain works. And then my dissertation was about creating a scale of good practices based on the MBE science that we can somehow standardize and summarize and help teachers use that scale to see if they are on the right path, if they're doing things that are more brain friendly, or if they're doing things that are not so brain friendly. And that might be the reason why their students are not learning very effectively, right? So I think it was the desire to make my contribution. Remember, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So that's my purpose now, to make my contribution to learning.
Thank you so much, Andre, for taking out time from your already very busy schedule, and really need second part of this. Till 6 questions are left to ask. So, Andre, we would bother you sometime again, inshallah. And amazing. Each and every word, each and every example, I could connect to it. And I think every part of my teaching journey, every part of my learning journey was somewhere reflected in the whole conversation. And I feel that was with the audience also. That is why we have such a massive number of viewers today. We had around 114 people viewing us at all times. So that's a big thing for us. Thank you so much, Andre, once again. Stay connected.
Thank you. I'm honored. And if I may, please follow me on social media and my blog, because I post about those things. So if anybody wants to follow my blog, it's EDC Rocks, ROCKS.com. And I have a lot of blog posts about neuroscience, MBE, and how you can incorporate those things into your teaching practice. Thank you very much, Zainab. It was an honor.
Thank you so much,
and I'm definitely available for a second part, okay? You just let me know when.
Yeah. Perfect. We'll do that. Thank you so much again. Have a good day, Andre.
everyone. Thank you for joining.
Bye. Bye. Thank you so much, Andre. Bye. So, my dear friends and fellows, that was Andre Hedlund from Brazil, and हमने बहुत ही काम की बातें सुनी और काफ़ी मेरे perspectives clear हुए regarding teaching, brain, mind. I used to think that mind and brain is the same, and I saw that most of us used to have the same belief. I would share Andre's blog link. I have it. I would share it with all of you. Thank you so much, everybody. Keep following us, and for sure, I would post in Andre's blog link as soon as I finish the session. The session is saved. आप चाहें तो इस session को आगे भी share कर सकते हैं in your circle, so that people who are not aware of the vitality and significance of educational psychology as an educationist, उनको अंदाजा हो कि कितना important aspect है, be it teacher training or be it teacher education. So that's it. Good night. आराम से सोइएगा, सुकून से उठिएगा, पढ़ते रहिएगा, पढ़ाते रहिएगा. अल्लाह हाफिज.